programs,
Got it.
plans, and projects that protect the Santa Ana River Basin in Orange County, California. It is Orange County, right? Mostly Orange County? A little
I'll
bit
talk
about
about that in the presentation.
Oh, that's right. All right, and the presentation. Just try to let you know, I know the territory a little bit.
Charlie, I think they changed it to, since they changed the name of the airport, it's now going to be called Green in Orange County.
Green in Orange County. All right, real good. Anyway, beneficial uses, maximize beneficial uses within the watershed in an economically and environmentally responsible manner. A key element is the Inland Empire Brine line, which has become an economic growth engine for inland California in Riverside County, allowing clean disposal of brackish water discharge from industry and utilities, ranging from groundwater desalters to food processors to power plants. Before joining the Santa Ana Watershed Project Authority, Jeff had a distinguished career as a technical leader and advisor at several notable companies over the years, including the WateReuse Foundation, the Water Research Institute, Carollo Engineers, and the Water Research Foundation. He received his BS in chemistry from William and Mary University and a Master of Science degree in Civil and Environmental Engineering from George Washington University in Washington, D.C. Please welcome Jeff Mosher.
Thank you, Charlie. I appreciate that introduction. I learned a lot. And I'm going to share my screen here. I think it will work.
You should be able to do that. Oh, very
It's
good.
working.
Do you see the presentation?
Absolutely.
What about
Well,
now?
we saw the presentation.
Okay, I'm going to move it back.
So it went away.
I have two screens. How about now?
Looks
That's it.
beautiful.
That's it.
If you got to get rid of the mirror feature,
Yep,
display settings. So
yep. I'm looking for it
do
now.
swap hide presenter view. Okay, let's just
All
start this.
right, that didn't work. Why is it so complicated?
Well, suggestion, start the slideshow.
Let me try it again. Yeah. Well, I did. It's on the other side. Let me try this. No. So I'm
If
gonna
you
try
can-
swap. How about
Yeah.
now?
There we go.
Oh my gosh. Technology.
Just like downtown.
You know, having two screens can be more trouble than it's worth. So, so thank you very much for this invitation to talk to you about our brine line. It's been around for, you'll see, for decades, and it provides a vital role for the watershed, but it tends to fly under the radar screen. I mean, even in our community, it's not very well known. But I'm going to give you some background information on it, sort of the history, but also what benefits it provides today, and a little bit of a background on, you know, this is a mixed brine line, and I'll go with what that means rather than a clean brine line, which is just like brine discharge. This includes other discharges. So just a little bit about our watershed. We're in Southern California. It's large. So there's 6 million people in our watershed. It's 2,800 square miles. You can see the blue line that goes through the middle. That's the Santa Ana River, and that's basically the thread that kind of pulls us all together within the watershed. And that river is used to, you know, not just transport stormwater, but a lot of recycled water goes in that river, and it's recharged throughout the watershed in different basins. And I say the upper watershed, which is San Bernardino and Riverside County, but also in Orange County, which is we call the lower watershed. So what's interesting about our watershed is, you know, how many water-related agencies are in the watershed? 97. There's 3 counties, and they're large counties, 63 cities, and then all the federal, state regulatory agencies we work with, and the special interest groups. So SAWPA is kind of unique. We're a joint powers authority which means that we were set up by our member agencies, and our 5 member agencies cover the watershed. So starting in the upper watershed, San Bernardino Valley Municipal Water District, Inland Empire Utility Agency, Eastern Municipal Water District, Western Municipal Water District, and then the lower watershed is Orange County Water District. And you may know OCWD based on GWRS, groundwater replenishment system, and the wastewater that they recycle and recharge their groundwater. But the upper watershed also has a number of recycled water projects that aren't quite as well known as GWRS, but all the recycled water in the upper watershed is used for recharge either in the upper or lower watershed. So not a single drop of wastewater in the upper watershed reaches the ocean. And that's important because the brine line protects the water quality of the water in the Santa Ana River and recycled water quality. So that's just how we're organized, background on our watershed. So SAWPA really has 3 elements to what we do. We own and operate the brine line, and that manages salinity of the watershed. We also do watershed planning under our One Water, One Watershed, or OWL program. And that's where we bring in stakeholders, work collaboratively, and try to find regional solutions. And that's been very successful over the past 15, 20 years. And SAWPA plays an instrumental role and be the forum where we bring not just our member agencies, but other stakeholders together. And then out of that, we started running what we call roundtables or task forces on particularly tough problems where we bring agencies together to solve. A lot of them deal with water quality, or trying to look at TMDLs, but try to do it from a regional point of view rather than every city having to do it for themselves. And our role there is really to administer and facilitate that and bring in experts. So those are the 3 things that we do for the watershed. Okay, so jumping into the brine line, I'm going to give you just an overview, and then it gets into some of the details. So there's 93 miles in the brine line. SAWPA owns and operates 73 miles, and it's to the east of that red, I don't know if you see the arrow, but this red bar, SAWPA owns and operates the 73 miles that are inland from that. And our partner, Orange County Sanitation District, not Orange County Water District, but Orange County Sanitation District, which is the regional wastewater authority, they own and operate the 20 miles of the brine line that's in Orange County. And so they provide for us conveyance. It goes through treatment, and that's because we have a mixed brine. I'll talk about that. And then they have an outfall that goes out to the outfall. And this is where it's been, since the inception of the brine line. So we have a 30 MGD capacity in the brine line. Right now, we're running about 12, 13 MGD. So there's, half the capacity remains. I have a chart on what that looks like, what our flows look like over the next 10 years coming up. But what's critical about the brine line is that it's a salinity management driven project. So I'll go in some of the details what that means, but we export 500,000 pounds of salt a day through the brine line, and that gets that salt out of the watershed. It gets it out of groundwater basins. It gets it out of recycled water, and that's truly one of the primary benefits. We have direct dischargers, so those ones that connect directly to the brine line, and then we also have indirect. Those are truck disposal, and I have some details about those. So in terms of the discharges, our groundwater desalters are about 70% of the flow, and industry, commercial, and truckers are the other 30%. Okay, so this was interesting. We went back in history, wanted to give some information on why the brine line was built. So in the 60s, there was a lot of turmoil, a lot of legal disputes regarding groundwater rights, surface water rights, including on the river, and there were thousands of litigants, right? So this was just, lawsuit after lawsuit, conflict after conflict. And so 2 of the major districts in the watershed, Western Municipal Water District, Orange County Water District, they filed lawsuits And it was at that point, they all threw their hands up and said, this is not working. So they decided that they could determine these water rights and how to share the river by negotiating amongst themselves. And so they decided that 4 agencies, the one listed here, would be set up to manage those rights on the river. So SAWPA was created at that time, and it was formed as a planning agency to address water quality issues. Because in addition to the water quantity, water rights, there's also issue about the water quality, specifically salinity, because there was high groundwater salinity that was contaminating the water. So these local leaders, they were worried about new water quality regulations, and they wanted to get ahead of the federal Clean Water Act that was coming down the line. So they wanted to form this regional agency to address them. And this article, which I reread, it's fascinating. One of the quotes in there is, this agency shouldn't become a forum for legal debate. And it's good to remind ourselves that, because, we don't get involved in lawsuits. We're really about providing collaboration and regional solutions to the issues. And that's been going on for decades now. It's been very successful. So it started off as, focusing on this water quality, and over time has moved into more watershed management. So the Brine line was conceived, planned, and built with addressing specifically salinity, but water quality within the upper watershed. They were looking at saline groundwater, other saline discharges. Later, RO desalter brine became a factor in the 1990s. So the Brine line was constructed between early 70s and 2000, and we connected with Orange County Sanitation's large trunk sewer at the Orange County line. That enables us to get our flows, through their treatment and to the ocean. SAWPA contracted for capacity in that line at OC Sand, so we own that to this day. So in terms of cost, how is it paid for? So the original 4 agencies, and we added a 5th one later, they purchased capacity in the Brine line. And the funding from purchasing that capacity was used to build the original Brine line, which in the dollars of the day was about 128 million. So it was paid for that way. There were extensions to the Brine line over time. Those have been financed with state and federal funding programs and through user rates. So in terms of paying for the Brine line, that's how it began and how we manage it now. So here's just some photographs of the original construction of the Brine line. The pipes run up to about 48 inches. I say average pipe diameter is 36. There's a lot of 30-inch pipe. So fairly big pipeline around the watershed. So the Brine line today is a little bit different. When we import water from the Colorado River in the State Water Project, there's a graph here on historical salinity in those supplies. We're bringing in the salt with that water. And the Colorado River is higher, can run as high as 700 milligrams per liter. But State Water Project, it varies based on rainfall. The State Water Project, ranges, 200 to 400. The variation in the Colorado rivers is mainly how it's managed, in terms of the Hoover Dam and Glen Powell. That's where you see the variations. It's not so much precipitation, but we're bringing in that salt, and that's a problem. That's a challenge. So the Brine line provides an opportunity for our agencies and commercial industries to dispose of salinity in a sustainable way. And again, we remove about 500,000 pounds a day. And we would like to achieve a watershed-wide salinity balance, but currently there's still an imbalance. It's fairly large, of over 400 tons a year. So we have work to do. The graph on the lower right, over the past 22 years, that 500,000 equates to 11 million pounds of salt. So it's very successful, but still there's work to be done in terms of salt management in the watershed. And this just to show you graphically that, when we bring imported water, it's about 1.2 million tons of salt. We export about 0.6 million tons of a year, and that's from the brine line and other options, and that leaves this 0.6 million tons in the entire watershed. So that's something that we have to grapple with. There isn't a similar capacity, but this is one of our interests moving forward, is continue to address this. So the benefits are very specific to different water, wastewater, recycled water efforts in the watershed. First, the brine line acts as emergency discharge for local wastewater plants. So if they have a system upset, a process upset, instead of discharging that to the environment, right, in a way that doesn't meet their discharge requirements, they can discharge that to the brine line. So it saves them violations, it protects the environment. And this can happen on a very small scale, but we had an episode last year where we had a wastewater agency that had to discharge 4 MGD to our brine line because, well, they ran out of chlorine. It was the chlorine shortage that we had. They didn't have chlorine, so they discharged it to the brine line instead of the environment. The water supply benefits are very important. So if we can keep those salty discharges out of the wastewater plant, then we can protect the effluent that's used for groundwater basins, but also allows us to do groundwater desalters. So we dispose of the brine, so we can desalt saline basins. We desalt wastewater for the recycled water, so we can spread that into the ground for potable reuse, and it protects the Santa Ana River and groundwater basins further down, all the way down into Orange County. So the recycled water benefits by keeping those salty flows out. We keep the salinity low, so it can be reused, and that supports recycled water projects throughout the watershed. So this is a bit, associated with our regulatory, but managing salinity, yes, it's a water quality issue, but it's also a regulatory issue. So we have a basin plan for our watershed. There's a couple basin plans actually. And in that basin plan, we're allowed to manage salinity through a maximum benefit program. So if we're able to desalt some places, we're able to use recycled water in other places. That gives us flexibility. And so we're allowed by using these desalters to have alternative water quality objectives. So higher salinity objectives for certain basins if we're removing salt from other basins. So it's looking at the watershed holistically rather than having to comply in every part of the basin throughout the watershed. And also, when we did this, we agreed that we would have certain water quality standards for the wastewater treatment plant for both recycled water and discharge to the river. I think this will give you a little bit better perspective on what that means. So you see these water quality objectives for TDS throughout the watershed. So I'll just pick Ontario here in the Chino basins. It's 360 milligrams per liter. But we're allowed to spread recycled water there, so it's tertiary effluent, doesn't go through RO, of greater than 400 milligrams per liter, because we have desalters in other parts of the basin that are removing salt. If we weren't able to do that, we couldn't spread the 400 TDS recycled water. So the regulators are making it flexible for us, but we had to invest desalters to do this. So it's a very holistic way of managing all the basins in the watershed. So back to the brine line. Our brine line is a mixed brine line. So we'll take, clean brine from groundwater desalters, but we'll also take other non-reclaimable flows or highly saline flows from industry, from other sources. They could be either direct disposal or truck disposal. And this really supports again, keeping those salty flows out of the recycled water, but it also allows businesses to locate in the Inland Empire area that produce processed water, highly saline, that they couldn't send to a POTW. So we have these truck disposal, direct disposal. It does go through wastewater treatment down in Orange County and then out through the ocean outfall. Okay, so some of our direct discharges are our desalters. We have a series of them throughout the watershed. They're listed here. The total capacity for all these groundwater desalters is 50 million gallons a day. That's the same as the Carlsbad ocean desal plant that's in Southern California, and that gets a lot of press, and we have the equivalent capacity for the groundwater desalters. So it's a lot of water, and again, all the brine from these are discharged to the brine line. Other direct connection dischargers include a number of businesses. They could have water softeners or cooling towers, boilers. It could be ultra pure type scenarios. We have a linen company that discharges their water after they run it several times for their purposes. Power companies with ion exchange and EDR. So it does support the local economy. These some photos of the International Rectifier. That's a chip manufacturer, food processing, and then the laundry is at the bottom. So we have these truck stations, which again allow for these flows to be segregated or separated from the wastewater, which becomes recycled water. There's one in each of the upper watershed member agencies near their POTWs. So we have places where the trucks come and they can dump it in there. So again, that's another service that Brine Line provides. So the way we operate the brine line is if someone wants to connect to the brine line and they're not right on the brine line, as you can imagine, that's not always the case. We build extensions to the brine line. Some of them are small. We do have 3 large ones. So just starting at the top, there's 2 that are wastewater RO concentrate dischargers. Those laterals are 13 and over 20 miles. So those were built and paid for by the sponsors. So we also have desalters at the bottom. There's 2 desalters there. So they built that lateral to connect to our brine line. So we have a process of determining when they would build it and when we would extend it. And as you can imagine, a lot of it comes down to cost. So some of them we might build, but they might pay for. So, but this is a big part of the brine line is we need to connect these laterals as needed. So in terms of our flows, so the table on the left, you can see 79% of the flows is from groundwater desalters. The industrial flows are another 10%, but then there's power generation, wastewater desal, which is increasing. We're seeing more RO of wastewater to control salinity and for potable reuse. And then there are some domestic flows in there for various reasons. And it might just have to do with emergency flows or isolated places that, there's issues connecting to the regular collection system. In terms of the brine line flows, in the chart on the right, you can see we've been bouncing around 9.5 up to 12 for a number of years. We just had a jump in the flows. We had a new desalter come on board recently, so that's ramping up now. And then we're projecting based on other increases in groundwater desalters and other new customers. It's going to go up to about 16 MGD by 2027. This is probably a conservative look, could be higher. But again, the capacity is 30. The line where it says 17, that's the treatment capacity we have at Orange County Sanitation District. So we have to purchase that from OC San. So when we exceed that, we'll have to purchase more. We do have a pre-treatment program. We fall under the NPDES permit of OC San. So we are a delegated control authority for our pre-treatment program. We collaborate with our member agencies So this is a significant effort on our part, as with any collection system in terms of monitoring and inspecting the discharges. So a lot of activities is involved in that. And, that has to do with the fact that we had, 58 dischargers or permits, and not just 6 or 7 desalters. So it's a little more complicated because of that. Okay, so cost. Because we have a mixed brine, we have to go through POT treatment at OC sand. So we have to pay for that cost. So the cost for the brine line is set based on the volume, as you'd imagine, but also the amount of BOD and TSS, because that's how OC sand, bills their discharges. There's also fixed capacity charges that are part of the brine line rates, and then the type of connection, whether it's direct or indirect. But I always like to point out that the cost is not determined by the amount of TDS. So the TDS can go as high as we can get it, and it won't impact costs. So that's something to keep in mind. We can concentrate our brine further, and that's not going to impact our costs with OC sand. So this gives you just a range of costs, for desalter brine, whether industrial direct discharger or RO concentrate discharger. It's all about the same, just under about $200 per 100,000. And again, because of the BOD and TSS charge, they vary in terms of the amount there. For the truck disposal, it's about $5,000 for it's $80 for a 5,000 gallon truck, and again, assuming that the BOD and TSS are under a certain level, obviously doesn't include the hauling costs. So I try to put this in a little bit of different perspective. So our direct disposal, again, it's just under $200 per 100,000 gallons. Truck disposal for 100,000 gallons, I don't know how many trucks that is. That's gonna be about $5,000. If you had to dispose of your salty brine by taking it to another appropriate discharge, it could cost up to $25,000 for that 100,000 gallons. So the direct disposal, it is a cost-effective way to dispose of brine in our watershed. I just want to go over some of the brine line activities that we're involved in. One is O&M. There's a lot we do in order to maintain the viability of the brine line: inspections, line cleaning, looking at valves, meters, doing maintenance on those meters. So there's quite a bit that goes on there through a continued basis throughout the year. It's scheduled throughout the brine line. One thing I want to mention is there has been scale issues in the past, and this goes back to 2008 to 2015 or so. And frankly, okay, this was before I was at SAWPA, but I actually worked on this a little bit when I was working for a different organization. SAWPA wasn't doing enough inspections of their pipes. And so they're throwing on these desalters. They weren't monitoring the water quality per se for scaling. And this problem came up and bit them. So they ended up with pipes that were almost completely filled with scale. So it reduced the flow that could get through them. The scale on the upper right, that's a very hard scale, probably had silica in there. The scale on the bottom left, that's more of a soft scale. You can actually kind of scoop that out. So we saw different scales in different places, but the majority of the scale was associated with the dischargers from the groundwater desalters, which makes sense. It's going to be higher salinity in those dischargers. But it was a big issue for SAWPA at the time. I have a couple more pictures. It's kind of embarrassing, right? This is like airing our dirty laundry. But the pipeline on the left, and this is where the pipe was cut in half, right? Because it completely filled with this. This is kind of a hard scale you could chip out. Wasn't real soft, but this you could you could chip out without having to grind out. This was a major problem. I obviously it got to a point where they didn't know exactly what was going on until it was too late. And then the picture on the right, I have no idea what's going on, but it's different type of scale that might form in these lines. So the good news is today we're managing scale. I'm happy to report we don't have any scale issues like the ones in the pictures you saw. So we have a cleaning frequency that helps alleviate. We do get sediment, so we have to clean for that. So we also monitor it for scale, could be soft. So we monitor for flow restrictions to see if that scale is building up. We do inspect with CCTV now on a regular basis. The primary reason the hard scale was eliminated was based on operational changes at the desalter. So the use of anti-scalants to eliminate scale. And I have to tell you that we've never seen any scale in the brine line where the brine is mixed with more organic discharges. Could be from a food or other food processing. And so that organic matter actually buffers the formation of scale, which is good news. But as our brine line goes more salty, these are issues that could come up. So we also implemented options to be able to clean spaces that were not accessible previously. So all this has allowed for us to manage the scale issue. The other thing that we're worried about is the resiliency or the sustainability of the brine line. So we did a criticality assessment where we're looking at what the factors of the brine line that would factor into critical components of the brine line. We wanted to have this inform our capital improvement program, and also to understand what sort of reserves we need, what needs to be replaced. And maybe there's some enhanced O&M efforts that have to take place. So it was a process that looked at portions of the brine line in terms of consequence of failure. This could be earthquake or other reasons. So rating them from very low to very high. So that's a consequence of failure. And then that probability of failure, again, ranking them from very low to very high. And then we could overlay these two and find out areas that were of high potential for failure based on this probability and the consequence of that failure. So we're able to use that to inform our CIP and other projects that we have. One of these things we did on this was valuing the brine line by different reaches. So the original cost, just talking about actual cost between 1970 and 2000, it was $128 million. So our consultant used a rate model to escalate that among other things, and they came up with a value of $255 million. Well, we had an engineering firm look at, okay, if you actually had to replace it, right? Given the additional growth in the watershed, what would it cost? And they came up with $344 million in 2019 dollars. So that was very useful for us to know that a replacement cost was this high. And one of the reasons why it's higher is this reach 4D, when it was put in, this is what it looked like in this region. And today it looks like this. So there's a number of places where obviously it's going to be more difficult. There's more utilities in the streets. So that was useful for our engineering consultant to help us work through what that means for us in terms of, when we have to go and replace this pipe due to R&R, what the cost would be. So that information was used to help develop our capital improvement plan. We want to assure the long-term viability of the brine line. Right now, it's $48 million over the next 10 years, but there's a number of things that we're doing condition assessments. That number could go up. The criticality assessment was very helpful in us thinking through this. So, the CIP addresses known improvements we have to make, O&M challenges that we know, but also these ongoing investigations to monitor the system. So the other thing we did that just recently in the past year is we wanted to do a master plan on the brine line. One had never been done, right? It had all been sort of ad hoc. But we wanted to understand as we move towards capacity of 30 MGD, what that means in terms of operating it, expansion, other issues. And we thought that this idea of a master plan would help us manage and implement the growth and future expansion. So the decisions we make, we want them to be informed. We want them focused on prioritized projects, and again, support the economic development. So we're in the process of doing this master plan. Some of the things that are included in there, these are some of the things we're thinking about in terms of the future, is what the ultimate capacity is going to look like. How do we make sure that the brine line is resilient for a number of factors, including climate change, earthquakes. We want to assure that our member agencies can achieve the capacity they have. So in the table on the left, we list the capacity by each of our member agencies or each of the agencies that own capacity. One thing you might notice is that total is 32 million gallons a day, and our capacity is 30 million gallons a day. We oversold capacity. They explained to me why, but I can't remember. But we're gonna have to meet that capacity at some point with understanding that the capacity is 30 MGD. So we have to maybe address that through storage, maybe do some brine concentration. But these are things that we would investigate in the master plan. And I would be interested in understanding if we could pre-treat for BOD and TSS before it goes to Orange County Sanitation, because we do pay for them to treat for that. If we can pre-treat it, we won't have to pay for that. Okay, I just put down a couple future issues that we're thinking about in terms of the brine line. One is PFAS, right? It's everywhere. As expected, it's in our brine line. And it gets in OC Sands biosolids. So it's going to be an issue for us. So we did just 6 samples just to get a characterization of what there. We looked at 38, but showing the results of just PFO and PFAS here. I mean, we knew it was going to be higher than typical wastewater. Wastewater here, could be 20, 30, 40, maybe a little bit higher nanograms per liter. But we were pleased to see it wasn't thousands of nanograms per liter. But these numbers do suggest that some of it's coming from the groundwater desalter. So it's in the groundwater, we're desalting, but some of it's also coming from our other dischargers, laundry, cleaning, that possibly could be a source. So one of the things we'll end up doing is probably working up the brine line to try to characterize what the sources are of this. Because I think eventually OC Sand is going to charge us for PFAS because they're going to have additional costs on their biosolids. So we want to be prepared for that. So other topics of interest, so our brine ends up in the ocean. Now we do fall under the NPDES permit of Orange County Water Sanitation District, but there's a possibility that the requirements there could become more stringent based on our California ocean plan. So we want to track that, understand how we can continue to discharge brine, potentially with new requirements coming down. The other thing that's happening at Orange County Sanitation District is they take the brine from GWRS, right? So that's about 40 MGD of brine. We contribute, 13, could be as high as 30 MGD of brine. So Orange County Sanitation in their ocean outfall, there are going to be times where the vast majority of the discharge is going to be brine, either Orange County Water District or ours. I'm not sure what that means, but we have to make sure the regulators are comfortable with that or understand that, and we'll be able to do that. We also just want, from an emergency response and climate resiliency, we think we can address these together in terms of what the brine line can look like and how we can invest in that. We just went through a review of our reserves, and we're in pretty good shape for R&R and CIP and other things. That was useful to see. And the other thing that we would like to do is maybe estimate the economic value of the brine line. So there's the value to drinking water, there's the value of protecting recycled water, water quality, there's the value to the companies that can be based in inland up higher and discharge to the brine line. Because I think, and I may be exaggerating, maybe not, but I think the economic value could be like $1 billion a year to the watershed for having the brine line. And that would be useful to know when people have to pay for the brine line, whether it's through brine line rates or expansions. But there's a large economic value to the brine line. I'd be interested in understanding what that is. So Charlie, I think that's all I had. I'll turn it back over to you and I'll answer any questions if there's time.
I've got a bunch of questions.
I don't have that much time.
But since I'm the host, I'm going to let others go first. So if you'll use the little raise your hand icon under reaction for those that want to ask a question. I don't see any hands up. Saw a hand. Carrie. Well, all I had to do was just mention it. Bam, bam, bam. I got 3 hands. Okay.
Nice presentation, Jeff. Really interesting. You mentioned that none of the brine is the cost and everything are related to TDS, but it's a mixed brine and it has to go through the Orange County Sands wastewater plant. Is there a point where the salinity has a negative impact on the wastewater treatment that it has to go through?
So Carrie, I remember when I was at the Research Foundation, I believe there was a study, I think it was done, that was looking at the impacts of salinity on wastewater treatment. This is when I was at Water Environment Research Foundation. And so I believe there is. I believe at some point there is. But Orange County Sanitation District has not brought it up to us. So that's an excellent question. It's probably something that we may want to include in our master plan, right? You know, what would be the high end of salinity that we could send Orange County Sanitation District.
Mm-hmm. Well, if they don't bring it up, then it's not a problem, right?
I hear you, but you know, it's one of those things you might get a call any day, right?
Mm-hmm.
All right,
Thanks.
Melinda, I think you're next. You're muted, Melinda.
I wasn't sure if you said me or not, sorry.
Yeah.
My question was related to the PFAS. I was curious if you know the source or if it's just general, just because it's everywhere.
That's a good question. So we believe that we know it's in our groundwater, right? So when we pump groundwater out for drinking water, not for desalters, we know that there's PFAS, and it can range anywhere from, well, non-detect up to just for PFOA, PFAS. I mean, it's not hundreds, but it's 20, 25, maybe at a high end. So we know it's in the groundwater. So we think it's also in the saline groundwater. But we, you know, it's kind of sensitive to like ask them to sample their concentrate for PFAS, but we're working on how to do that. But we also think that our other discharges, like the linen washing, you know, that we have a cardboard manufacturer, right? And don't you see a lot of that PFAS on cardboard? So,
Yeah.
You know, maybe they're switching out, I don't know, but we think a couple of our discharges could be contributing high amounts.
And if I might, a follow-on question, have you only used one lab or have you looked at multiple labs? And if you've used multiple labs, have you seen much variability in results?
Yeah, so you may know this, but there's a lot of PFAS monitoring orders that are in California right now for airports, for wells near airports. Now we're doing it on wastewater. So there's a number of labs that perform PFAS. We've only used one lab. So I don't know the variability for our water, but I have seen data on the variability for other, you know, let's say groundwater wells. And there is some variability, but I haven't seen a great variability. And I think part of it is, the laboratories here, because of the volume of PFAS sampling, they've gotten really good at it. And so I think the results we got are, they're probably pretty accurate.
Thank you.
All right, Eric, I think you've got one, and then Deborah Deal, looks like have you got your hand raised?
Yes,
Okay,
Yes.
let's get Eric first, and then we'll do Deborah.
okay.
Hi, Jeff. Good presentation. Thanks for giving this. I had a question on do you ever look at other metals, like you said you have some industrial dischargers, you have any strong base anion resin that may go in there that has chromium, vanadium, uranium, all that other good stuff? Or because the wastewater plant doesn't look for it, then you're not necessarily looking for it?
Oh, so that's a great question. So, and I went into it just briefly on our pretreatment program, but we monitor for quite a bit on
Okay.
our dischargers, and that has to do with the requirement, that comes from OC sand. So
Okay.
we're basically a wastewater collection system. So we have to comply with all those requirements because it goes to Orange County Sanitation. So we have a lot of information on that. And as you know, pretreatment programs, if someone has an issue, they can't discharge it, right? So
Yep.
that's all been pretty active.
Cool. Thank you.
Deborah Deal, got a question.
Hi, Jeff. I was wondering if you could provide your perception of the general public's perception, around water recycling and reuse, or SAWPA, just in general.
Yeah, so Deborah, I'm really a recycled water guy. Somehow I became an infrastructure guy. It's kind of interesting.
Yeah.
But so in California, we've gotten past it, right? And there really isn't any opposition. There was 15 years ago when I first came to California. But today, because of the water supply problems and the drought and the success stories, there really isn't that much opposition, and it's certainly not organized. I mean, in LA, when they're talking about recycling virtually all of their wastewater from Hyperion, which is like 200 million gallons a day, and LA County recycling 150 million gallons a day, and a lot of that's going to have to be direct potable reuse, not putting it in the ground. And there really isn't that much of an outcry. In fact, I mean, what people say is, well, why haven't we done this sooner? What is taking us so long? Why are you telling me 2035? And so I think we've turned a corner. But I've worked in other areas, Idaho. I mean, I worked on Cloudcroft years ago, and there definitely can be, the yuck factor, and it takes persistence, but it can be overcome through, there's different things that people need to hear. Like one of them is you test water quality. They're like, oh, you test the water quality? They don't even want to know what you test. They're like, well, if you're testing it, well, that's good news. A lot of it comes down to the reputation of the agency, like Orange County Water District. I mean, they probably get a 10 out of a 10 in terms of their reputation locally. So when they went to the community and said, hey, we want to do this, they're like, no problem. Yeah, go for it. If you say it's good, it's good. So that reputational factor is real. And then there's other things. Once people see the treatment processes, they go, wow, this water's really clean. But I will tell you, there is a contingent of people, maybe 10%, that will never approve. They're just against it. Just like I think people are against nuclear power, GMO. I mean, you cannot convince them. And the goal isn't to convince them, it's just to answer their questions. And that's where the outreach comes into play.
Well, thank you very much for that. Also, do you think the public has woken up to the problems with PFAS and PFOS?
I still think we have a lot of work to do there. I don't think, I mean, there's awareness, but I don't think there's awareness that it's in our water as much. I think that could get worse for us as the water community before, and you know, I mean, there's a lot we don't know, and it's everywhere. It's in rain, not just stormwater. It's in rain. And but I tell you what we did here, and you know, one thing is, you know, Orange County, not so much the upper watershed, but Orange County, they're wealthy. I mean, they have money. And so when they found PFAS in their groundwater supplies, so they shut down 50 wells. They're putting in, you know, mainly ion exchange at the cost of almost $1 billion.
Wow.
And they just did it, right? They didn't wait for the regulators, they didn't wait for regulations. And they wanted to do that because word was getting out that it was in their water. And you know, it's a toxin, right? It's a carcinogen. So there's no question about that.
Right.
So they acted sooner, and that was probably a good move on their part.
Okay, thank you.
I'm gonna pull my hand down. I'm gonna go to Bob, and then we're gonna go to Mike, and then my questions, and then Eric. Assuming you can stick around long enough, Jeff.
Sure, no problem.
Bob, what a rip.
Charlie, thank you. Jeff, admittedly, probably the least knowledgeable about water processes on this call, but yet co-founder of this New Mexico Desalination Association with my dear friend Mike Hightower. So I'm going to ask you a question that if it's too ignorant to answer, I'm okay with you telling me that. Place yourself in a land of multiple oceans that cannot be seen, which is called New Mexico. Purportedly, we're one of the largest inland deposits of brackish water known to man. I'll say we're in the top 3 to 5. We are now talking about desalination a lot because we're in the middle of a drought, and we continue to be, and we're going to continue to be, to the best of my understanding. Can anything like this brine line be effectuated in New Mexico if we were to perhaps have 10 or 15 desal systems placed around the state doing multiple millions of gallons per day? And I will give you one instance that Facebook in a city just south of Albuquerque, Los Lunas, uses 600,000 gallons a day of fresh water to cool their computers' cloud systems. And they are chasing business away from Los Lunas because they can't supply the manufacturers and the interested industrial folks that want to be there with water. So big
Yeah.
question.
Right. So the use of, you know, RO membranes is going to produce this brine, and you know, we've looked at the numbers, and the cost for addressing that brine can double the cost of a project and makes it, you know, cost prohibitive. A brine line could enable you to centralize the collection of the brine, and you don't have an ocean near you, but if you could centralize, treat the brine through some, you know, volume minimization or zero liquid discharge, and you spread the cost around to multiple desalters, multiple communities, that could be a way of finding a cost-effective way. I mean, I don't know if you could inject the brine underground. I don't know if you could find some place where you could have large evaporation ponds, but if you could use a brine line to collect it and bring it to a centralized place for processing, treatment, extraction of water, that potentially could make an argument for a brine line. And I think the brine line has to work for your community, right? So we figured out the sweet spot for our brine line. You know, there are a couple other brine lines. They're very specific to the needs of the region. And so you would have to come up with that driver for your region. It's probably not a mixed brine line. It's probably a clean brine line where you could collect it and transport it, centralized treat it. But that's one idea, Bob.
So just one other comment. The first two in my mind are pretty archaic, the deep well and the evaporation ponds. We think a big user here, and we actually know a big user here in the state are the oil people for fracking. They just want it concentrated and they can collect it and they'll take it all for free. And that, I guess, pretty much eliminates any cost of treatment. But what about the monetizing of the brine that's being attempted in El Paso now by a second company? And I think there's another company out of Philadelphia, Eureka, that we've spoken to that monetizes it. How do you see any of that being realistic and formidable?
Well, it is formidable. But we need to see those processes more proven. I mean, the original one at El Paso, I'm not sure how well it worked. I don't know about the second company, but that's basically the silver bullet. If we can figure out how to make that type of processing work where you're extracting valuable commodities from the brine, I mean, that's a silver bullet. But everything I've seen, you know, it's difficult, expensive, but if we could crack that nut, I do think that would be the solution.
Thank you. Appreciate your responses.
All right, Mike. You've been waiting patiently.
So Jeff, I have a two-part question. One is, as you move forward to try and improve your meet your quantity requirements, and you start to concentrate that brine, you know, TDS goes up, and right now you're not, you know, looking at TDS. So I'm wondering what you think you might do if you have the situation like we saw at Huntington Beach, where, you know, seawater desal because of the ocean outfall issues. I think that's what they were, I hear, you know, keeps people from using, you know, desal plants and doing high salinity injection into the Pacific. So maybe you could talk a little bit about why you thought the Huntington Beach plant was, you know, unanimously thrown out, and are you down the road going to be at a position where you're going to have brines that maybe are similar in TDS to ocean desal? So maybe you could just talk about that, because it's surprising that people are jumping all over direct potable reuse and passing up water quality that may be significantly better, possibly, than direct potable reuse of municipal wastewater.
Yeah, Mike, you're right. But the one thing that we have going for us in terms of our discharges, Orange County Sanitation District, they segregated our discharge out of the water that they recycle. So the wastewater that goes to GWRS, that's segregated from our brine line. And what that means is, you know, we have a dedicated treatment train. So if we had to do something to our treatment because of the high salinity, we could do that, right? That's possible. So that's good news. And that's the reason why we want to track what the state does, the California Ocean Plan. We want to be involved because, as you know, Mike, they've banned, once through cooling, right, on the coast of California through the California Ocean Plan. And our fear is we're the next target, right? And so are they going to like us dumping our brine in the ocean? That's a conversation. The Huntington desal plant, you know, there's a lot of things that were wrong there. I mean, Poseidon didn't put their best foot forward, and they were their own worst enemy. And there's reason why they were successful in Carlsbad. I mean, one of them was they had San Diego County Water Authority. The situation in Huntington Beach was a lot more pragmatic. I mean, no one that I knew really thought it was going to get through the California Coastal Commission, and they were dead set against it. And you know, a lot of people who are on that commission are environmentalists, and so in order for a desal plant to get permitted, especially that size with an ocean out intake and outfall, it's got to check off every box. So what they focused on was the siting of the Huntington Beach plant. And the siting was in, I don't have all the details, but it was either a hazardous waste site or something. And that was never going to fly. And Poseidon didn't answer that question. They're like, no, we want this site. We want this site. So they were kind of, bullheaded or whatever. And they weren't willing to change the site or anything like that. And it was never going to pass. And it's close to a ecological reserve as well. There's just so many things that were lined up against it. But I tell you, Mike, now that they killed that project, I say they, who's they? I mean, environmentalists, Coastal Commission. Now that they've killed it, all of them said, while they were killing that project, is there's a place for ocean desal in California. And so what I've been talking to water managers is, hey, listen to what they said. They said there's a place. We got to figure out what that means. So it's possible as long as it's not Poseidon. It's got to be the right location. But Mike, I think I'll give you an example of what I would do if I could. Create a project where the benefits of the desalinated water run all up through the watershed. So the upper watershed benefits from the desalinated water. And we could, so the upper watershed pays for it, pays for part of the desal plant, and we would trade imported water back and forth. And then if you went to the Coastal Commission and said, all these disadvantaged communities up through the watershed are going to benefit from ocean desal, I think a project like that could get through.
So you'd have to have a way to get it up to the different communities, and maybe
Not the water.
We
We would trade imported water.
Okay.
So I don't know if you know this, but the recycle water plant in that Metropolitan Water District is doing with the County of LA, Arizona, CAP, as well as Southern Nevada Water Authority, they're paying for part of the plant. And then Metropolitan Water District is going to trade them water in
out of the Colorado. Yeah.
And I like that. I like that approach. I think it makes a lot of sense.
Well, there's somebody that in Southern California has a brine line and all the right of way that could put a line up to all those communities too. Yeah.
Okay.
Maybe you know who runs that. Okay. Thanks, Jeff. Appreciate it.
Sure, Mike.
I've got some simpler questions. One of the first things you brought out was the purposes of this line was exporting saline groundwater. Why would anyone want to pump it out of the ground just to throw it away in the brine line? Was it because the water got too salty to use in time?
That's an excellent question. Charlie, I wasn't around then, right?
Oh, right.
But from what I understand, that salty groundwater was actually coming up out of the ground and was contaminating either irrigation water or the Santa Ana River. And so what they wanted to do is they wanted to capture that water, put it in the brine line, and send it to the ocean.
All right, that makes sense. Variety of pipe materials used in construction. I think I saw reinforced concrete pipe. I saw some clay pipe. I saw some Hobos pipe, which is fiberglass mortar, fiberglass epoxy mortar. What do you typically use today on new construction of the brine line?
So I don't know. I can get back to you on that, Charlie, but I will tell you that the brine line was put together like a Frankenstein, right? And it was whatever was cheapest. And we've suffered, from breaks, and there's some pipes that are beginning to bow now for different reasons. So we're trying to be a little more cognizant of what the right pipe is. But Charlie, I have to get back to you on that. That's just not my area.
Okay. It's just the Hobos pipe is the slippery stuff that's hard to form a scale on, which is probably maybe that's what it's evolved to.
So in the newer installations of desalters, you're absolutely right. And you don't want places where the brine can form. You want it slick. So some of those best practices have been included on the newer stuff.
Is there a similar centralized brine collection facility anywhere else in California of
Yes.
which you're aware?
Yes. There's one in Callegas, which is Ventura County. And it's also for groundwater desalters. And what's interesting about that system, it's 100% groundwater desalters. And so you're able to bypass treatment and it just goes out in an outfall.
How do you spell that? C-A-Y?
Calleagus.
Oh, A-U-G, Callegas. Okay, yeah. All righty. That's good to know.
And
Is
there's one that there's one, I don't think it's operating. It's much smaller and it's in more towards San Diego, but they're looking at bringing that one back. So, but I will tell you, Charlie, one of the things we're going to do in the master plan is we're going to look for either gas or oil pipelines that are being decommissioned,
Hmm.
right? You know, because we're banning fossil fuels in California. So what are you going to do with those pipelines? So we think there's an opportunity to repurpose those existing pipelines for oil and gas for possibly brine lines.
Buy them for pennies on the dollar. Just remember that you may be buying a pig in a poke in terms of pipeline integrity, but you're smart enough to figure that out for yourself. Couple more questions. Is there any interest in the district, rather in the authority, in recovering minerals from the brine? You know, like try to turn, dabble your foot in what would be called a circular economy. In other words, we have the salt. Is there anything of value that maybe could be collected in a zero liquid discharge scheme, or is that just not on the drawing boards for now?
So it's going to be part of our master plan. You know, first we're going to look at, you know, just volume minimization, right? Just get water out of it. But, you know, I've asked around and turns out that once their brine goes into our pipeline, we own the brine. So it might be something that our member agency would do, or it might be something we could do, but it's more likely that we would do it than the member agency. So yes, I would say it's on the drawing board. It's going to be a part of our master plan, but it'll take time.
Okay. Yeah, there's certainly not a clear path forward for that yet, but it's the magic silver bullet in this industry that we're all looking forward to. Hell, 42 years ago, Dr. Hillel Shuval of Israel announced desalination is the technological messiah. It'll be here someday, like the Messiah, but it's not here yet. Well, we've come a long way. Just a couple more questions. 4 million gallon per day emergency discharge from one municipality to Huntington Beach wastewater plant. Did Huntington pick it up without a hiccup, or was that, you know, any operational concerns for the folks at Huntington?
Well, they're not happy when the situation comes up, but we have a system where there's notification as well as approval by them. I mean, their plant is, they have two plants. I guess the one that we go to, I mean, it has a capacity of like 230 MCV. Now, the problem is they don't have all the treatment trains running. So they want advance notice in order to set up their operation. So they can handle it. They grumble about it, but it's one of the benefits.
Okay. This was easily one of the most informative and easy to understand presentations we've had in a long time. I really thank you for the opportunity, you know, time you made to give the presentation and to stand by for all of our questions. One last favor, can we post your slide deck to our website?
There's a licensing fee. I'm kidding.
Licensing.
Ah.
How many bags of salt? Yeah.